from Happy So Lucky, and I am going to teach you today about how to make Y seams without tears. I know that a number of you are watching this are doing the tattoo quilt sew along, and so the Y seam technique I'm showing you can be used for any kind of fabric project, but I'm going to use it with paper because it's going to be geared towards doing Y seams in paper piecing. So if you have a look at this tattoo quilt block, the love block, there are two Y seams over here that are joined, and you can actually best see them from the back. So if you have a look here where this little swirl of seam allowance is, that's where the Y seams have come together. And so these pieces are all pieced before, these sections, and then you do these three seams over here. So there's two Y seams on this block. And I know there were some of you in the Facebook group that were commenting that you were scared of the Y seams, and I'm going to show you how to overcome that and make it beautiful. You can see how lovely and flat that is. There's no tucks in the fabric or anything like that. So to teach you that, I've designed a block specifically for you, which is some lips, and there's no paper piecing in this actually, but we're going to use paper as if these other sections had been pieced. And this set of lips here actually has 4 Y seams in it. So in order to do this, you have to really master the technique. So that's a lot of practice. If I turn it around here, you can see the 4 Y seams are here with their little nested seam allowances. And I think by the time you've done those 4, you'll be pretty pleased with yourself and will have overcome your fear of Y seams. So there are 4 blocks, as you can see over here, that you're going to piece, and then you'll put those together to make the lips block. I'm going to show you a little bit about my patterns and how I write them to make Y seams easier. The one thing that's really important is this little dot, which is the corner where the Y joins. So that would be that little corner over here, there, and there. So you can see the Y shape coming together, and that is the critical point where they all meet together. The important thing is never to sew past that point, so you never sew into the seam allowance. So I've marked that with a dot, so it's easy for you to use with a pin to test your alignment, which you'll see in a minute. I've also put little arrows on here to tell you which piece goes to which piece, because when you have a whole bunch of loose pieces, you're never sure. So that helps you to make sure that you're joining the right side. So you can see this one says 2, 3, and this is piece number 3. So you know that you're joining it to the right piece, and it has that on all of them. In addition, another really important thing in my patterns that I do to make it easier for you are these little notches on the corners of the points, and they don't look like much when you're cutting them out. In fact, I think often people just ignore them and think they're random, but they're not random at all. Those little notches are really important. Even this little one here, you can see it's subtle, but there's just the end of that is knocked off there, and that is really important when you line these pieces up, because if you're lining up just that top edge, that's great, but you're not sure left and right what your accuracy is like. But by having those little notches, that really helps you have like a 1, 2, 3 point lineup, and then you have great accuracy. So let's get stuck into some Y seams. The first thing you need to do is cut the templates out of the paper, select your fabrics, then with a glue stick, glue baste the templates to the fabric, and then cut each of those templates out on the lines. Then machine baste them with a long 6mm stitch. Okay, so here you can see the 4 sections of this finished block, and each of them has a Y seam. You can see the Y here in between the 3 sections of each square. So we need to make 4 of these in order to make the full set of lips. If I turn this over, you can see, how does that go now? You can see that the point where the Y meets has a little circle around it and a tiny little dot in the middle of it. And that is our key piece of information in doing this. You can also see that, as I showed you in the previous images, I had glue basted and I have machine basted the fabric together. Ordinarily, when you are piecing a Y seam, if this was just fabric and we weren't learning about paper piecing, you wouldn't need to have the paper templates on there. But this video is made specifically to teach you about Y seams within paper piecing. And so normally there'd be other piecing in this template, and we don't have that. So for that reason, we are machine basting and glue basting it. I usually start with the longest section of the Y, but in this particular instance, they're all more or less the same size, so it doesn't really matter which one we start with. So I'm going to start with this one here, and what we're going to do is we're going to line up that edge. We're going to sew the seam, so we're going to line the two templates up together and put them right sides together. The first edge we line up is the seam allowance edge, and the next are these two here, and you can see the little notches in the pattern. Those notches are to help you to line up the two sides, so that if you have all three sides lined up, you know it's going to be accurate. So to check that, we're going to put a little clip in place, and then we're going to take a pin, and we're going to stick a pin through that hole right down the middle of it. And hopefully when we turn it over, it's in the middle on the other side. And as you can see, that's pretty perfect. So that's great. And that's the benefit of having these little corner notches for you to use as a guide. So I'm going to use my clips and clip it where it's not on the seam, because I need to sew the seam. So I don't want the clip in the middle of that. So I'm just going to put it over there. Now, ordinarily, if this is the seam we're sewing and we want to back stitch into that dot, so we don't want any stitching in the seam allowance at the Y seam. That is a really critical piece of information. You do not stitch over that dot into the seam allowance at all, otherwise your fabrics get caught. So ordinarily you would back stitch into that, but if you back stitch, your presser foot is in the way and you can't really see where you're going. So what I do is I actually flip my template around and I stitch forward. So I start about here, about a half an inch or 3/8 of an inch away from the dot, and I stitch forwards towards the dot so I can see where that dot is coming. And as I'm getting closer, I'm watching the length of the stitches so that I can anticipate where that needle is going to stop. And you want it to stop in that exact little point over there. And you're going to stop with your needle down, and then you're just going to swivel your template around and then sew the rest of the seam. When you get to the other end, you can actually backstitch in the seam allowance, because this is not the Y seam point. That point there, we do not go in the seam allowance. So now that it's clipped together, I can take it to my machine. I'm going to start here, as I mentioned, go into this Y seam point, turn it around, and do the rest. Okay, so I'm taking my template over to the machine. I'm going to start about a half an inch or 3/8 of an inch away, and put my presser footer down so that I can see when that little dot is coming, and I'm going to sew slowly, one stitch at a time. So you can see now, I don't know if you can see underneath there, my needle is right in that point. So at this point I'm going to swivel it around 180 degrees, and now I can go forward out of that Y. Take that guy off. Important to stay on the line. And on this end, as I said, I can sew into the seam allowance. So now we're going to open that up, and you can see we have the first line of our Y seam. So we'll bring this other piece over here, and you can check on the back to see how everything fits together. So that one goes in there. And let's do this seam next. So what we're going to do is we want to make sure that we're sewing this seam here, so this piece is not being stitched at all. So we want to make sure that that seam allowance is tucked out the way. So you can just finger press it out the way for now. And you're going to align this right sides together, the next two pieces. And you tuck that out the way, and then you fold that over, and then you can see that little notched, let me just do that like that. You can see that little notched edge there lining up with that angle over there. So that'll give us the angles, and on this side over here lining up. So let's clip that guy, and I'm just going to clip this one so that that stays out the way there. And I'm going to test this with my pin. So again, we stick it through the little middle of the Y seam, we turn it over. It's slightly off, so I need to just adjust that. think I might have had the pin going through skew. So I'm going to put it through straight. So you want the pin at 90 degrees, not at an angle. And you can see, oops, it's not quite accurate. So you can just find where that point is, and then that will help you align it. And now I'm going to, I think I'll just clip it on this side here, like that. So again, we start just before the point, and we sew forwards into it, and then we turn the paper around and we sew the rest of it. So going one step at a time. Okay, so I'm stopped in the middle of the point, and you can see, really important, that this seam allowance from the first piece that we think is tucked out of the way, so that when that needle goes down there, it's not catching onto this little piece of seam allowance. So that's great. We're needle down, and we just flip it 180, put the presser foot down, and back stitch at the end. So now you can see it all coming together nicely. And I just finger press the seam allowances, and I tend to do it in a swirl. So if that one's going that way, then I make this one go this way, so that it's going around in a swirl like. So this is our next seam. So again, we line up the top edge and just roughly hold that in place, and then you want to tuck the seam allowance of the one that you're not sewing out of the way. So just fold it back and then fold that edge over, so that it's completely out of the way, and also you can see this notched edge over here and over here to line up. So let's clip that guy down, and then over here we line that up and clip that down, and then let's pop the pin through the hole again, and it's coming through perfectly on that side, so that's great. I can actually sew it from this side. So a little bit before, I'm going slowly into it, stop with it down, making sure of course that this bit of seam allowance was out of the way, and then we just flip it the 180, and now the moment of truth. We just fold it out, and there you have it. It's the perfect Y seam. So when it comes to the seam allowance, as I said, this one's going that way, and so we want this one to go this way and that one to go that way. And then what you end up with is a nice little swirl. If you have a look at these guys here, I've pressed that with an iron, so you just have a little swirl because that makes it nice and flat. So with this guy here, we'll just press it like that, turn it over, and give it a little roll, and you have a nice flat seam. I'll just finish that last block, and then we can put our lips together. So I'm going to sew the two top lip pieces together and then the two bottom lip pieces together, because then we don't have to try and match this point. If we sewed those two together first and then these two together, you'd have to try and make sure that that point was aligned. So hopefully if we do it that way and this way, we're going to be worrying about aligning here and here, and that should give us a nice straight edge just to stitch across. So let's do these guys first. So we just put them right side together. We just want to check, for the sake of accuracy, how it'll join and the lips are, and that looks good. So let's just whip that together. Beautiful. And I'm going to do the same with this piece here. Just line them up and just check that point where the lips meet in the middle. That's good. And these are just, you know, rectangles, so they're pretty easy to get accurate. There's no weird angles here now. open that up. That's good. So I'll just give these two a press and then we can do our final seam. Okay, so I've pressed these. I'm just going to put them right sides together. And the two critical points to match now are the corners of the lips. So we just put those little clips up to the seam allowance so that we can fold it on there. I probably should have more than two, but that's all I have on the table here, so I'm just going to use the two. So I can see that point there is good and that point there is good, so I'm just going to go for it. Let's have a look. I felt like it was pushing out of it. No, we're actually all perfect. So there we have it, our lips. This basting comes undone really, really easily. So you can just, pull the first one and yank the rest out. So that's a really quick remove. It's not a hassle at all. You can just yank it out. But it did a good job holding everything in place while we were stitching this together. So I'm a big fan of machine basting. But there we have our lip block, which will make an awesome makeup pouch. So here you can see the back with the 4 little swirls of the wire seams, which is nice and neat and tidy, so that's a beautiful thing. Also, when I pressed the seams for the top and the bottom, I made one go left and one go right so that you can nest that nicely over here and also not have too much bulk. But you can see how neat and tidy those wire seams are, and our block is all ready to go, and as you see, it was a really simple process, which was what I like to call Y seams with no tears. So it's a beautiful little lip block.